Hello everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you very much to Heike and Tero for inviting me. I think it's the second Interreg Baltic project I joined. The other one I attended a webinar at some point was cities multimodal. I think Riga was in that one as well. So I cannot but agree with what was said in the morning, that there seems to be an ecosystem around the Baltic Sea. There seems to be a lot of innovation and a lot of openness towards new solutions, towards innovative way of addressing the societal challenges. So really happy to be here. I work for Eurocities. I guess many of you know it. I work as a project coordinator in the area of mobility. I'll say during the presentation a bit about the project I work currently on. I'm originally from Romania. I was trained as an urban planner, so my perspective on mobility comes from there, a little bit urban planner perspective. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a technology person, although these days the boundaries between these disciplines are more and more blurred. I worked for a while with mostly with cities in Romania on planning, on attracting funding for their mobility projects coming from their SUMPs. I moved to Eurocities in spring this year, so I'm still fresh there. Now, for those that do not know, Eurocities is a network of major European cities. It was founded in 1986. At the moment, there are over 200 cities. The last time I saw a number, it was 208 from 38 European countries and representing more than 130 million citizens. Eurocities has a double role somehow. It represents the interest of its city members and engages them in dialogue with European institutions across a wide range of policy areas, mobility among them, but also social affairs or environment or smart city and so on. But then it also has this role of facilitating or a brokerage role in facilitating exchanging and sharing knowledge between the cities. And sometimes in this role, we also are involved in projects. Now, what I'll talk today, it's a range of new policy developments in which I'll try to put them a bit in the context and try to make them friendly and relevant for cities. One of them is the Smart and Sustainable Mobility Strategy that I guess was launched last year. And now there is in preparation something called the Efficient and Green Mobility Package, which will replace the previous Urban Mobility Package from 2013. This maybe there were a series of consultations done during summer for preparing this package. It was called the Urban Mobility Initiative at that time. In the meantime, it changed its name. So maybe some of you participated. Also,
sorry, Lucian, sorry
yes?
to interrupt you, but you still have your first slide.
Yeah.
Should it have already changed?
No. I'll just give the context and I'll go to my slides afterwards.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted.
Thank you. Then another policy area I want to touch is the TEN-T policy, about which I'll say a bit, and that's very relevant for urban mobility because under the revision, cities will play a higher role in TEN-T policy, and the connection between TEN-T policy and the sustainable urban mobility policy will be sought after. And I'll say a bit about that during the presentation. Now, there are three main areas I want to talk a bit. So one is an approach to planning as designing choice, and that will give us some nice conclusions at the end. Maybe some of you have read the book Nudge. It was a bestseller. I think it's still widely read these days. It's a book on behavioral economics. So what is the concept defined there is called choice architecture. And that's the design of different ways in which choices can be presented to consumers and the impact of this way of presentation on the consumer's decision making. So that's, that concept is explained there in terms of several policies areas. So besides, business, like, I don't know, pensions and a number of other areas. But I think it's a relevant one for mobility planning and local mobility policy as well. So under such an approach, the number of available choices, the manners in which the attributes of these choices are presented, the presence of a default option or aspects like choice overload when there are too many choices, they all play a role and influence how the decision is made. And the key takeaway message from this, behavioral chat a bit is that the way we design choice influences the user behavior. Now, going to mobility planning, clearly the way mobility options are designed influences the outcome behavior. And here I think local mobility planning and integrated city mobility plans are the ways in which we design choices for the users. Of course, previous users, what the people are used to play a role. So it's not only the way we design the choice, but that plays an important role. So by a certain way of designing the options, we can influence the mobility behavior and get the outcome that we might want. Now, all of you know, you all work in mobility, what a sustainable urban mobility plan is. So it's a strategic plan designed to satisfy the mobility needs of people and businesses in cities and their surroundings. This concept was existed for many years, like in France, the Plan de déplacement urbain, it's very old. The same in Great Britain, I think it's called local transport planning there. But then in the last decade, this concept was defined, guidelines were launched and was promoted by the European Commission across Europe and in all cities across Europe. And of course, considerations having to do with sustainability and livability play an important role in this concept, and decarbonization became another desiderate in the context of climate emergency. That's a bit newer, although somehow it was there already. Okay, why do I say that the way we design the choice influence the behavior? Examples are many. I'll quickly mention some, but parking is a key one that comes to mind, maybe because I come from Romania, where it's not very well managed or not at all managed, and actually the streetscape is very much filled with cars and so on. But I think parking is a key policy and a very powerful one. And if a city finds the way of managing it, there are many ways to control demand and car use. And actually not doing that has a lot of negative effects, because a lot of other policies are based on that. So for example, if you want to have dedicated infrastructure for cycling, if you don't have a good system of managing the parking, that's impossible. And actually, I've read recently a title. I think it's a chapter in a book on Copenhagen, but the title of the chapter is "Cycling Policy is Parking Policy." So that's a really good one. Also, there are other ways of restricting car use. Vehicle access regulations were also tested, promoted, tried in several cities, framed in different way, like congestion charging in London or in Stockholm. I guess you all know about it, or more like low emission zones in several other cities, Brussels included. Like the whole region of Brussels is actually a low emission zone. A safe and active mobility infrastructure are also important. Like usually, we hear this argument when we talk about cycling in cities that you know, my city is not Amsterdam, that it will never happen. Well, Amsterdam was not Amsterdam some decades ago. You need to design and build the infrastructure that's needed, and then cycling will be taken on by the citizens. Here it's a famous saying, build it and they will come, and that's true for all infrastructure. You build infrastructure for cars, you get cars. You build a lot of parking for cars, you get lots of cars. You build infrastructure for bicycle, you'll have bicycles. The same for dedicated public transport corridors. If you want a good modal share for public transport, it needs to be efficient, besides, I don't know, attractive, easily accessible and affordable, and so on. But efficiency is one of the key things, and if you don't have dedicated corridors, public transport won't be efficient. Here again, I might give an example from my own country. Like if you want to see buses really staying for half an hour in the middle of the street in traffic, go to Bucharest and you'll see that. I guess there are other cities as well, but this is the one I know best. The same traffic management and prioritization in intersection. Again, public transport is more efficient if you give it priorities in intersection and so on. And key to that, because it's a lot of regulation making possible all these things, is the enforcement. And here again, a lot of capacity is needed. Sometimes there are very good regulations in place, but lack of enforcement makes them not work. So all these are just a few examples of showing that the way we plan, you know, the space in the city, the way we plan the options people have for moving around the cities, influence their behavior. Now, when particularizing, just to systematize a bit, I think we have 3 dimensions. I won't go into detail in them. One is the physical dimension. Most examples were about that. Space reallocation in the cities, dedicated infrastructure for public transport or for cycling, multimodal hubs. These are all things that have to do with the physical dimension of shifting the behavior towards sustainable modes. There's also the digital dimension. We can use route planners, mass services, or other digital tools. For example, the maybe you know Smart Way to Antwerp, the route planner for the city of Antwerp in Belgium. It marks with a green tree the options that are more sustainable. So that's a way of nudging people towards the sustainable modes, but also, you know, simply having an application, because some people just want to get their options through an application, might shift people towards certain modes. And here I think it's the example of Uber in terms of service. Is nothing like nothing different than the traditional taxi services, but then it came through an application, and that made it you know, very appealing. And yeah, it took a huge market share, and I think even in cities in US made concurrence to the competition for public transport in a significant way. Then also there are aspects having to do with the human dimension. So not only creating the options, but making people know that they exist, that they are better, that they are more climate friendly. It's important. And also there are ways of nudging people towards a certain behavior. The one, like the example I mentioned for Antwerp, having the green options marked in the route planner, it's one way of nudging people towards that behavior. Now, the second part of my presentation, so I hope I convinced you about this part, that there is this really important role for cities in designing the options people have. And sometimes even the negative behavior that we consider is a result of this planning, and maybe we can go back and replan, relook at the option. The second thing is something Eurocities advocates for, and as part of the recommendation that Eurocities has submitted for and this consultation exercise for the efficient and green mobility package. And as simple as it might seem, it's not necessarily there in all policies. So what we consider is that alternatives to private cars and new last mile delivery solutions need to be developed. That's already in the some concept, it's everywhere, but then it doesn't really happen, or there is some inconsistencies about what that exactly means. Facilitating modal shift is a priority for cities in the fight against climate change and in improving cities' livability. Decarbonization and improved livability will not just be achieved by cleaner vehicles in cities. Here, I think we all agree electrification is not enough. If we keep the status quo, but all vehicles will be electric, not much changes in terms of livability, the way the space is used, maybe a bit in terms of local emission, like strictly in the city space. The same for automation, like automation might prove really useful in a certain controlled environment, maybe even for public transport or other modes. But if we just go for automated individual cars and they will replace our cars, then I don't think it will make much of a difference. What we advocate for is that affordable and attractive public transport and safe, active mobility are key in achieving the 2030 climate neutrality targets for cities. And here I'll say a bit about each of these aspects, and I'll add one, which I think it became important, particularly in the last period. So public transport definitely remains the optimal way to ensure sustainable mass transit while limited the use of public space. There is a lot of investment needed in public transport. So really those that look at this sort of things, and when you see the figures for such investment, they are huge, sometimes even like the highest investment a city makes overall. But with the right level of investment, more livable cities will be created with better air quality, job creation, limiting the effects of climate change, and improve social cohesion. We've seen even in cities in the developing world how important public transport is, and how an innovative, efficient solution actually helps the social cohesion for the city. Now, of course, the level of investment here is the main barrier, probably, but new financing models can be considered. There could be, I don't know, congestion charges or UVAR charges of any sort, and the money could be earmarked to be for public transport, or I guess other ways of funding public transport. So here there is the place for innovation, I think, to find the new models of financing. But what we need for public transport in terms of technology, I think we already know. Now, there is a lot of discussion about mobility as a service. As far as we're concerned, we think that mobility as a service should have public transport at the core of the ecosystem, and it could be a powerful one, bringing together, public transport along the main corridor with, I don't know, last mile solutions and so on. So MaaS could be useful in this way, but MaaS should not be a way of creating artificial competition for public transport, we think. Now, active mobility has positive effects not only on citizens' health, but also on climate. Here I've put a figure because I think it's really important. It's from a study from this year. People relying on active mobility of transport, like walking and cycling, have a carbon footprint of up to 84% smaller than people who use other transport modes, so other including public transport. So that's a really important figure, and we should all consider it when planning mobility for cities. Now, what the main barrier here is definitely safety. You're vulnerable as a cyclist, you're vulnerable as a pedestrian. So building a safe infrastructure and repurposing public space for these purposes is really important. I can give an example from Bilbao. So creating safe urban environments generally, so not only the infrastructure also helps. So one such measure is reducing the maximum speed to 30 kilometers per hour. Bilbao was the first city to do that, and they had a reduction of accident I don't find the precise figure, but I think it's 24 point something in the first year of the application of this measure. So a quarter of all accidents in the city went away. And Brussels did this as well, starting last year, and also the figures by now look positive as well, like the impact is significant. Another thing that might be considered, because so safety is one thing, but then when you use your bike daily, you need access to a way of storing your bike, which is accessible and you can easily access it, not, I don't know, on the balcony on the 7th floor, because then it's very difficult to go on the stairs every day with the bike several times maybe. So having a place where to park the bike, and that looks small, but it's huge actually for those that use the bike. And I don't know why people find it normal to think about parking for cars, but not normal to think about parking for bikes when building, new residential or office buildings. And there could be norms about that. And I think cities have the mechanisms or can put in place the mechanism to enforce that. So I think that's really important. It also can be part of renovating the building. There are lots of EU fundings for improving the energy efficiency of building. And I think this sort of things can be considered in those renovations as well. Another thing I want to add here, so it's multimodal hubs. I put it generally, but it's more related with the need for logistics and deliveries in the context of the growing flow of deliveries generated by e-commerce. So multimodal hubs have different roles, but I'll mention only this one in relation with delivery. And here there is this example in the project called ULAD. It's dedicated to on-demand logistics, and the city of Mechelen in Belgium implemented this sort of smart lockers in mobility hubs, like in places where there is a lot of transit of people. And let me see if I find quickly I found the number for Bilbao. The reduction in accident is 27.79, but for a reduction in so it's 97% reduction of CO2 emission and 75% of fine particles compared to conventional last mile delivery like diesel vans, just by setting up this sort of smart lockers. And that looks like a technology that is available. Cities can do it rather easily, and the impact is huge, like 97%. Now, the third topic I want to talk about, and that brings in a bit the projects I work on, and that's the last one. It's better connecting cities with the surrounding environment. And a number of things come in here, but I'll talk more about the 10T, because the 10T revision, a 10T regulation revision is planned, I think for this December. So 17th of December is the last date I heard. And there are important changes having to do with the role of cities and urban mobility at the city level. So one thing we always advocated for is that cities should be better integrated into governance of Trans-European Network, 10T. As you know, here it's mostly the national authorities, the national governments that are involved, or sometimes regional governments, depending on the general governance of a country. But cities have a rather small role, although the effect on what they have to do, it's big. And I explain immediately what that means. Now, in current 10T regulation, like the one that is about to be changed, the role of cities is recognized under the concept of urban nodes. So whenever you hear this urban node thing, is typically about cities. And two things I want to discuss in relation with the role of cities as urban nodes. So one is about policy coherence, like when you bring together urban mobility policy and 10T policy. And the other is the role of cities in the new 10T regulation. Now, what are urban nodes? Urban nodes, what defines them is like what makes them relevant for for TEN-T policies that typically they are the starting point or final destination for passenger and freight moving on the network. And there are also points of transfer within the different transport modes. Like typically, if you have a multimodal hub, a multimodal infrastructure is in cities or their functional urban areas. Now, this brings in challenging issues in the field of freight and logistics, passenger flow, sustainability, livability, but also integration of the nodes in the TEN-T network and integrated policy answers that go beyond what the city has as attribution. So this has to do with coping with the transport demand generating by the TEN-T network, also mitigating the negative consequences of traffic, integrating large infrastructure into the city fabric, establishing effective cooperation structures at the functional urban area. You know, when you define the HUMP, the recommendation is to do it at the level of the functional urban area. So that requires a lot of work into, you know, finding the right type of cooperation and governance structure that could implement that. And there are significant barriers there. It's one of the duties of cities to you know, lead to drive this sort of cooperation, to drive towards this sort of cooperation structure. Also cities, because multimodal hubs are the places where different territorial levels and different transport modes are connected. Cities also have a role in investing into such hubs. So that's why it is relevant for cities to look at TEN-T policy, even if at the moment they do not have you know, too much of a say in that policy. So this is what I already mentioned. There are two different policy areas. Of course, there are many aspects which are separate, but there is an overlap, and the overlap is exactly the place where we talk about urban nodes. Now, why is that important? TEN-T policy ensures improved European interconnection for passengers and goods, and that's a good thing. Cities want to be on a TEN-T corridor because that brings economic opportunities, and of course we all want that. However, at the urban nodes of the network, there are negative consequences having to do with the traffic, congestion, poor air quality, noise, road safety, the kind of things that are typically discussed. So cities and regions need to develop sustainable transport system mitigating these negative consequences. And indeed, the current TEN-T regulation stresses the importance of integration in the 88 urban nodes as identified in the current regulation. I'll say a bit later how that will change. But it seems in planning this two transport system, the TEN-T and the urban mobility, we talk about different planning paradigms, and ensuring policy coherence is a very, very complex issue here that should be followed in all policy development. So on the TEN-T side, we care more about territorial coverage, connectivity across the EU territory, eliminating bottlenecks, maximizing travel speed, minimizing using cost. These are still some of the key goals of the Trans-European network. Although there is an active effort here as well for decarbonization, looking for less emission intensive technologies, multimodality, and so on. But the focus is still very much on travel speeds, efficiency, costs, and so on. Now, on the urban mobility side, the shift towards sustainable mobility paradigm is faster. I think there is a focus on accessibility, people overall ability to reach services and activity, focus on sustainable and equitable transport system, efficient integration of sustainable modes, focus on a more accessible land use. So the focus is very different and the planning paradigms are different. So keeping that in mind, it's really, really important to always look for coherence and look beyond the city boundaries and even towards policies that go way beyond the city's boundary. Now, the revised TEN-T regulation I said about, planned for this December. So one thing that will happen, the list of urban nodes will be extended. So from the current 88 urban nodes, I think the cities in HUPMOBILE are all urban nodes in the previous regulations, so maybe not so much of a change for them. But out of the 88 urban nodes in the current regulation, there will be 460 urban nodes going beyond the core network. The criteria were largely, like there was a bit more about it, but largely all cities over 100,000 people as population. And when there are NUTS 2 region with no such city, the main city in that region. So that's how the number of 400 cities was reached. And some obligations are considered for the cities as urban nodes. So in order to improve the efficiency of the TEN-T network, cities will be mandated to establish an SUMP. And also indicators having to do with this SUMP will be established at the EU level, and cities will have to monitor these indicators. Still, one question that it's really important, and this was already underlined in a report by the European Court of Auditors, there is a risk that the adoption process may become an administrative formality to get access to fund, and that the SUMP may thus not be of the quality needed to drive improvements in urban mobility. And I come from a country where SUMPs were made mandatory for the large cities to have access to the ERDF and cohesion funds for the money for the urban mobility project. So there was a condition for those projects to be part of the action plan of an SUMP. So it was mandated. And I've seen SUMPs done like that in a very formal way. There is a document, you check the box, you're eligible for funding, but then it doesn't really have an impact in the real implementation and in the real condition of the urban mobility in the cities. Now, the recommendation we have submitted for this policy is this: to support the existing and the future urban nodes, to help them better understand the implication of their status, especially future obligations. Because at the moment they have this role, it's recognized under this concept of urban node, but there is no mechanism that cities can actually influence TEN-T policy. So that's really key, particularly if the Commission wants to set obligations for them. Now, another thing, because it's related with the connectivity between urban nodes and the surrounding rural and suburban areas, and there was a question in the morning about that in the chat. We recommend a clear definition of what an urban node to better reflect this the functional urban area concept. And we know this is defined in a functional way, not necessarily in administrative boundaries, like having to do with the commuters, traffic, and so on, and also with logistics, goods delivery, and so on. Also, our recommendation said that collaboration mechanisms should be set up that involves local authorities. So this has to do with the first thing I mentioned. Also, we recommend a flexible approach of mandating SUMPs, because there is a question of what exactly is an SUMP. I know cities that are very advanced in terms of mobility that planned their mobility as part of their climate plan. So they don't formally have an SUMP, but they have their mobility planned in a very rigorous and integrated way. So some flexibility here should be acknowledged. Also, when thinking about criteria to assess the SUMPs, to avoid exactly what the European Court of Auditors said, local authorities should be involved in the definition of those criteria. Now, here I'll say a bit about the two projects I work on at the moment. So Scale Up and Move 21 are two projects dedicated to well-connected and multimodal urban nodes. So they test various strategies to accelerate the take-up of smart, clean, inclusive mobility. So a number of solutions, both in terms of mobility and logistics, will be tested. And so from the cities in HUPMOBILE, Hamburg is involved in Move 21 and Turku in Scale Up. So again, very happy to be here. In Move 21, we will have 3 living labs that will develop an entire ecosystem to develop this solution team. These are Oslo, Gothenburg, and Hamburg. Also, we have, as part of the consortium, so with budget allocated for that, 3 replicator cities, which are Munich, Bologna, and Rome. And basically all 6 cities will replicate some of the solutions from the others. So we hope for a very meaningful exchange here, and successful solutions to be tested in more than one place so that we can promote them further. In Scale Up, Antwerp, Madrid, and Turku are involved. And here there will be a call for, I don't remember right now how they are called, but something like follower cities. This will be launched at the end of next year. So maybe Riga or Tallinn would want to join us in Scale Up. In both these projects, we propose something which is called the Urban Nodes Forum. So this is what I was aiming at when I told Heike that we will talk later about it. So we want to go out with results from the project, trainings, ideas that results from the project to the whole urban nodes network. So at the moment we wrote the project, there were 88, now there are 460. So there will be the Urban Nodes Forum organized, available for all the cities and promoted towards all these cities and towards EU policymakers. So here is a place where we can work also together with ECF and the kind of things that were mentioned. So yeah, this will be announced and will be public. So I guess you'll hear about it. Now, quickly, just before ending, you seem to be all aware of the EU mission for climate neutral and smart city. I say that because Heike is a friend and she won't be upset on me. So I hope after that we won't call it Matthew Baldwin's initiative, but we'll call it, the European Cities Initiative or something. So I said it even in public meetings to some EU representatives that I speak Brussels. So that's true in many contexts, but I think this mission actually it's a huge change to be a driver for some sort of change which we cannot afford not to make it. So we're there. I think in the span of our lifetime we'll see territories under the sea level and so on. So really that there's an emergency here. Now, what's the mission? Cities play a huge role in terms of climate mitigation. They take 4% of the EU land area, but they are home to 75% of EU citizens. They consume 65% of the world energy, and they account for more than 70% of the global CO2 emissions. So really, there is the play game to reduce emission. They could contribute to the Green Deal target to reduce emission by 55 before 2030. They also, I guess, know about the Fit for 55 initiative that aims for that. When I said more should be done about mode shifting, I was aiming particularly at that because Fit for 55 in terms of mobility and transport only mentioned electrification and nothing else. So that I think it's a minus there. The aim of the mission is to deliver 100 climate neutral and smart cities by 2030, and also to ensure that the cities act as experimentation and innovation hub for other cities to follow suit. And also in terms of time frame, and here also put the logo of the Net Zero City projects that is supposed to help the implementation of the mission. I didn't know that's a huge consortium, so really I don't know all the partner. I didn't know that the Tallinn University of Technology is involved, but I'm glad to hear it. So here, maybe for those that think of applying, I heard Riga wants to do it. So the mission was launched in September. Like a few days ago, the expression of interest for cities to join the mission was opened. In May next year, successful cities will be advised by the European Commission and will join the Net Zero Cities to start the contracting process. So Net Zero Cities will play this implementation role. Also in Net Zero Cities, and I think Eurocities is mainly responsible for that, they will develop a stop-shop platform for all cities to exchange knowledge on these sort of things and to advance together towards the desired outcome. And then in March 2023, the pilots are supposed to start. So I hope that's relevant for some of you. Now to conclude, to bring all things together, I think I convinced you that the way we design choice for urban mobility and logistics determines the user behavior. So that only shows that there is, you know, a lot of power, a lot of mechanisms in a city's hands to drive change. Integrated planning and coherent policy are key in achieving the desired model shift. Like if, for one hand, we spend a lot on developing, I don't know, cycling infrastructure, and then we also support measures that bring a lot of cars that would make cycling unsafe. That's, you know, it's a very crude way of explaining, but that's incoherent and it won't bring the desired results. And also, maybe you wonder, because I went through the presentation, I mentioned, you know, public transport, about which is available and quite well developed, I think, in most European cities, and it's available for decades, so it's nothing fancy about it. Then cycling, which is, it's not so present in many regions, it's present in some, but also, you know, we know bicycle for a while, so nothing fancy there. So you might wonder why this presentation, because, you know, there is nothing innovative, and it was exactly on purpose. What I think is that we have the solutions for decarbonizing urban mobility available. They are mature technologies. Of course, there is place for innovation. Of course, there are ways of making, I don't know, public transport attractive and cycling more safe that still need innovation. But the key technology, the core of it is there, and we can use it as today. And EU policies and support programs should act as drivers for this transformation. And I think, yeah, as I mentioned, sometimes they have their own vocabulary, sometimes they have, you know, their own bureaucratic way of acting, but I think they go towards the right direction. And if steered correctly, they should help the cities to deliver the desired results. So I think that's all I wanted to say for today. Thank you very much to all of you, and I hope I didn't went too long.
A few words about the policy guidelines, recommendations, and conclusions. And as you all who have been here for the whole day, you know that although we would like to have radical solutions, there are no silver bullets or something so novel that could be done to solve the whole issue. We have to take it bit by bit. So we have different policy guidelines and recommendations, and they are presented in the publications and tools related to the project theme. So they are embedded to the tools and actual use, so that they can be taken as such there. We have had simulation here which provide guidelines related to optimization of transport flows in practice. Then our participatory tools provide policy guidelines related to participatory planning and also on improving stakeholder engagement processes, and also organizing the process of user and stakeholder involvement. And of course, we have had discussion on mini pilots and case studies that contribute how to introduce and assess new technologies and services. And actually, in this report published by the ITEL Digital Lab, there is also high quality knowledge on how cities can trigger and manage sustainable mobility innovation based on the HUPMOBILE project. And they are planned to publish it openly and also sent directly to the list of urban decision makers in PSR area. Then, of course, we have developed this sustainable self-assessment tool and impact assessment tool. And based on the theory and practical testing with the cities, these provide quite good guidelines for what kind of key performance indicators to use in assessing sustainable mobility in a holistic way. They are not necessarily perfect, but they are quite good already in guiding you towards the right direction. And of course, lots of different kind of best practices are collected and shared between the parties. And this is, of course, one of the key issues and topics of the Interreg project. It's not necessary that you should find something very novel, but it's about sharing things together. So rather than trying to take the moon from the sky, it's about taking one step further, one step better, and just sometimes taking the bigger leaps with new solutions. And together we could also say that the results also provide basis for creating conclusions on how new innovation processes, new organizational and governance concepts, and changes in planning processes can result in new forms of urban mobility solutions at the urban district level. So that these would not be too separate from each other, there's also HUPMOBILE framework and policy guidelines group of activity within our project, and different main policy guidelines and tools will be collected there and combined together so that it will become easier for others to see their main contributions, so that they are not so scattered to different tools and reports. Unfortunately, Royal Institute of Technology people responsible of this were not able to participate today. So there's just a draft version which is currently under construction there. And what we have, of course, learned that it's all about the people. On now that we go, as we were in the previous slide, I was talking about what in which fields we have contributed policy guidelines and recommendations. Now we go a little bit to the upper level. So it's all about people. For example, citizen behavioral change. How do we act ourselves? But this is what the cities and others can also, by design, change by nudging us towards certain directions of acting more sustainable way. Secondly, we need these grassroots initiatives from the people, so we should ourselves be active. And we know that it's about communication and cooperation. Despite different projects and others, we still find it that we still need different networking activities in different fields to even enhance the cooperation and the transfer of knowledge between parties. So that's why these Interreg projects are also crucial. And now talking about the people, while we have these grassroots initiatives and we need more participation of the people, also to ensure that the services actually are done and designed according to their needs, we also need to get the support from the upper level management. Because without the support from the upper level management or by leading by example, we don't get very far. This is also something that we have learned, that we also need to have the political background and support so that it doesn't jeopardize otherwise good intentions and actions we have done. And in this slide, I think in one slide kindly, I would say I kind of summarize our findings and what we have also heard today from the keynote speeches and the message that was also embedded in very many different presentations today. There are several good solutions around the world and the BSR cities, but we still need to improve the communication of the working solutions. There are descriptions of existing mobility solutions, and they are like recipes in the cookbook, in the words of Heike. But every city has to season the recipe with its own way. So, and to do that and to ensure that it's done the correct way, we need more stakeholder involvement to adjust the suitable solution in the local implementation. The citizen co-creation with the citizen, participatory planning, and also stakeholder involvement and stakeholder engagement. Therefore, we need methods and tools that are easily available for enabling this participation. And as a recommendation, for the cities with different resources, each and everyone should choose an easy-to-use selection of tools and methods that cover different stages of the planning, but also fit your city with its citizens and other stakeholders so that they are able to use them in terms of skills, cost, and time, because we know that the cities have very scarce resources in this field. And we wonder whether that could be also one of the reasons why we have good implementations of services in different European cities, but when we try to transfer and adapt them elsewhere, we make some failures, and sometimes they do not succeed the very first time, not necessarily even the second time. But as the case of the city pipes in Helsinki, when it was done the third time, it was done correctly, and it was even beyond the expectations of anyone. So also, we need to increase the resources and capabilities for stakeholder involvement so that we can be sure that different parties and others contribute to it and ensure that it will fit the city environment. And also, while there are very good solutions around the Baltic Sea cities, for reason or another, people are not that, I don't know whether it's a Nordic culture, but people are not that proud about sharing even the good results and achievements they have achieved. So please be open and share with proud your achievements to others. And of course, this might be the other one there is that it could be because of this project and that we always should report some positive news, and also because of the politicians wanting us to only say good things. Please also be honest and tell if there are some things that do not work, and especially even more often, what is important to make something work and what kind of solutions or ideas do not necessarily work as well. And then lastly, I would say that please, more courage to try and implement new concepts. I think still cities are a little bit too careful at developing new services. Some cities are better, some are worse. Please push more aggressively new mobility concepts and solutions and see which ones work best. Test fast, fail fast. I think, for example, mini pilots and the adaptive traffic lights of Tallinn are very good examples of this. If it works, it's not very even if it hadn't worked, it wouldn't have been that expensive. And also because we know that municipal decision makers are always packed with full of work, probably the only way to make better and new innovations is to improve the capabilities in cooperation with the companies and startups, because they are more eager and hungry to find and develop new ideas and concepts. And then a little bit more, little detail, but also quite much of our daily mobility is still commuting. So I think cities together with employers and why not other municipal and state level stakeholders could think that how we could develop more sustainable commuting, company by company. And also, I think that what we have also discussed here together is that, as Heike said, we need to have change. We can't continue how we have done so far. So we have to have very high ambition levels, but we also need to understand that even if we aim high, the road there usually goes step by step. Rome wasn't built in a day. Copenhagen or Rotterdam, Amsterdam cycling and the shift in the culture wasn't made in a day. It takes a little time, and I'm afraid there are no fast tracks that you can go. But on the other hand, it also tells that every city regardless of what is currently their level, can every day do better and better by learning from others and then implementing the ideas in their own city.